William Menefield. Welcome to Jazz Piano Skills, man. I am so thrilled to have you today.
Oh man, I'm so excited. Thank you for having me. Man, this is what can I say? This is
Right.
what we're supposed to be doing right here.
It's exactly right. And I
Yeah.
love that you got the Hawkeye shirt on, right? In fact,
Oh yeah.
that's how I found you. University of Iowa, on the jazz faculty there, and I'm going to give you time to talk about that a little bit. But I found you there at the University of Iowa, and I'm from that area, man. I grew up. I
Oh
grew
yeah.
up. Yeah, you know where Davenport, Iowa is, just down Interstate 80 there a little bit.
Right, right,
And
right.
I grew up in the Quad Cities, and
Okay.
yeah, and then made my way down to Texas. And I know you've spent some time in Texas too.
I did. I did. I went to grad school at the University of Texas at Austin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
are you still a hook 'em
Oh yeah,
horns?
I still represent for my horns,
So
Absolutely.
so the
But
question is,
I
man,
gotta rep the Hawkeyes now,
right,
that's
right. Well, hey, they had a pretty good run in the March Madness here.
Yeah, yeah, they absolutely did. Absolutely did. My horns got upset in the first round. So, that was tough on us. And then and I'm in my hometown is, Cincinnati. So, we our Bearcats basketball program is normally pretty good, but they're kind of rebuilding and getting it back up there. They got some
Right,
young talent, but Hawkeyes.
right. Go Hawkeyes, man. So, hey, listen, I want you to take a few minutes right now and kind of share your background with the Jazz Piano Skills listeners. Everything from your hometown, you mentioned that you're from Cincinnati, but share with us your childhood, your hometown, family life, and how you got into music, and we'll go from there. So, I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am the child of two musicians. My father is a saxophonist, and my mom, vocalist, violinist, and a music teacher from many years before she got into elementary
Mhm.
school administration. She retired as a principal, but definitely a musician. You know, composition. My mom taught
Mhm.
piano lessons and violin lessons and voice lessons and all these different things. So I grew up in a musical household. There was a piano around, instruments always around. And my first instrument was actually violin. I started on violin, played violin for a year. In the first grade, I switched to cello because cello's a little more comfortable. They always get to sit down, so that's why I switched. In fact, you can see my cello back here in the
Yeah,
video.
that's awesome. Yeah.
Um, and
Uh,
so piano actually came. It started more as recreation. It was just for fun because there was always one around. I wasn't studying
right.
formally, for a long time, so that was just for fun. And I was always into the art some kind of way from the time I was in kindergarten. I was in some kind of art school, Shield Primary School for Arts Enrichment. Then I went to
Okay.
Performing Arts High School, School for the Creative and Performing Arts in Cincinnati.
Well,
Um, and I remember I was 12 years old, and because my mom really wanted us to have a diverse musical experience. She had us in a lot of things, from playing strings to I played in a handbell choir for a
wow.
while. I sang in choirs. I did a lot of different stuff. But she also bought a lot of different albums. I grew up on LPs, and then we started doing CDs, and of course. So when I was 12, I remember laying on the floor with a set of headphones and listening to Kind of Blue all the way
Wow.
through. And I literally just laid on the floor and listened to it.
Mm.
And it was at that moment that I knew that jazz would forever be a part of my life. I fell in love with the music. And of course, it's kind of blue. Everybody pretty much falls in love with jazz once
Wow.
they hear it.
That's the album, man.
Right, right, right. It's funny. I'll say this kind of parenthetically, but there was this debate like, what are the top three jazz albums, and it's like kind of Blue and Love Supreme were the two that everybody agreed on, and we could not come up with a third one. It's like there's so many other records but
Right.
literally everybody picked those two. So
Right.
it was like, okay,
Right.
well, I guess it's just two then. We don't. But anyway,
Oh, that's funny.
that's when I fell in love with it. I studied with a piano teacher for about 8 months when I was 15. It was an amazing 8 months piano teacher. His name is Erwin Stuckey out of Cincinnati. And from then on, I just, it was just me just listening and playing
Right.
and listening and practicing. And eventually I got the opportunity to get out there a little bit. Started playing gigs when I was in high school,
Right.
uh, and I got signed to a local label, J Curve Records. Did
Wow.
an album right after I graduated high school. That was a really amazing experience. I learned a lot about, not just the process of preparing music for an album, but also what it's like to be under contract, what it's like to get in the
Right.
studio, and the
Yeah.
process of getting musicians together. Just all the kind of
The business side.
exactly the business side of music, and from there, I took a few years off. I decided to go to college, but I actually majored in classical composition. And
Hmm.
one of the reasons why I did that is because I was already working in the jazz world. I was already
Hmm.
gigging,
Right.
and
Right.
I got with a local band led by Mike Wade and Melvin Broach, two of my mentors. When I was young, they brought me in, and I learned a lot from being in the band. And there's nothing like you can share it all day, but there's nothing like being on the bandstand, and getting yelled at by cats.
Yeah. Yeah. All those embarrassing moments,
Oh
right?
man, like that's the old school, man. Those old school cats, they're like, hey man, look, no,
Wow.
they're in the middle of the tune too, Bob. Like it's
They
like,
will, right? Hey, I'll tell you a funny story about that. I talk about old school. Those old jazzers, man, they don't mince any words, right? They they
right.
they just tell you right what it's all about. And I remember I got done sitting in on the bandstand, and I was walking off, and the jazz pianist, the guy that normally the regular pianist, as I walked by, he said, "Hey, man, sooner or later you have to say something."
Oh wow, 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 wow.
Right?
Yeah, I that
Yep.
reminds me of when I got yelled at during the tune because I had been shedding my confidence and I was all proud of myself and I'm just like filling it up with all these chords. And my mentor Melvin, he looks at me, he just scowls at me. He's like, "Space, space," and I was when I tell you about, I was so scared, man, I just stopped playing.
Yeah, you gave him space, didn't you?
Oh, I gave him plenty of space after that. But what I love about that moment is that even though he
Oh,
totally yelled at me on the bandstand, he came up to me after the
oh,
set and was like, "Hey, man, listen,
right.
I want you to know, I know you've been shedding, you're getting better."
Oh,
But I
oh,
just, so he really made it a teaching moment
oh,
after that. Like after he scared me, he made sure it's like I know
oh,
you've been chatting, but let me explain, and then. But
oh my God.
that was one of the best lessons I ever had after getting yelled at. Because he came to me, he taught me, he said, "Listen, you want to make sure you're being musical with your comping. You want to make sure that there are moments that you're gonna need to give a little more, moments where you need to give less, moments where you might not need to play at all." And then
Right,
Mike Wade came behind him and recommended that I listen to My Funny Valentine, Foreign
mm,
More, Miles Davis, and
right,
listen to how Herbie was comping for Miles, and obviously not just his relationship to the solos, but also just to the
right,
band in general. And I
right.
learned. I mean, I had that album on repeat for weeks, and I just really dug in. That's when I really started paying more attention to the relationship between the pianist and the drummer, and the drummer and the bassist, and the pianist and the bass. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh, yes, right. So important because everybody wanting to study jazz, everybody's trying to figure out the notes, and we go like, I always want to go. Can we stop for a second and listen to a much larger landscape here than just the notes? And that's what you're talking about there, right? The
Absolutely.
interaction between the pianist and the bassist, and so on. And just you don't even have to know what notes they're playing. Just listen
Right.
to what's happening.
I tell my students, all the time. I typically break things down like this. I say the most important musical skill you can have is your ear training. And
Correct.
ear training encompasses, as you know, Bob, literally everything. Everything. Like
Correct.
it's not just, oh, let me recognize that they're playing a seventh chord, or let me
Right.
recognize that they went to some altered thing. No, it's dynamics, it's relationships, it's your musical decisions are all based off on how you analyze all this real time data, and having the awareness is all about your ear training. How do I hear these things? Let me make these appropriate musical decisions, and based on what I am able to hear, and training your ears. Man, there's nothing like that. Nothing like that.
Right. Well, and you know what? Your ability to hear space, like what you were, right? Hear space, hear silence,
Right.
right? You have to hear silence, and so many young musicians are not trained to do that, you know.
So
And
you've been spying on me, Bob? Is that what's going on? Because I tell my students this all the time. I said, you can't. I'm not ever gonna tell you less is more, because that's not specific enough. You need to know how to hear the space and make the decision, because that's what the music calls for. Not
right,
because you're just using
yes,
this less is more thing. Like, that's not what how you want to do it. How do
correct.
you hear it? And then do it because that's what the music calls for.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Count Basie one time, and he said, "Listen to what I don't play."
Mm, I love
He's
that.
right. Listen to what I don't play.
I love
I go,
it.
wow, right?
Yeah, that's heavy. We can stay
Yeah,
there for the whole podcast,
right. So,
man.
hey, I want to go back to your mom. Can we go
Yeah,
back to your mom for a second?
yeah.
Because we know how important moms are, and
Oh yeah.
but I read something about your mom that that I want you to talk about, because uh, that's a courageous woman,
Uh-huh.
and if I read correctly, the rumor is that she removed all the TVs from your home, completely took them out of the house, so you can just
Yes,
focus on actually productive things.
that is 100% correct. And so I was 8 years old. I have
Wow.
a brother and a sister. I was 8. My sister was 6. My brother was 11. And she was just like, "Yeah, this TV thing is too much of a distraction for you guys. I've had it." And she got rid of it. And it wasn't like she got rid of it like, "Oh, you're on punishment," and then 2 weeks later she brought him back. We didn't have television in our homes for 6 years.
Man, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it
That's
was
awesome.
awesome. Now, it didn't feel awesome for about the first month. You know what I mean? Like, we were mad, but of course she had the foresight and the parental and maternal fortitude to stand her ground, and ultimately, after about a month, we didn't even think about it anymore, and that's actually when I started writing music. I started writing
Yep.
music as a result of her getting rid of the TVs, and during that same span is when I fell in love with jazz, and I started just playing, and then my free time became more about exploring music than it did about watching television. So,
Correct.
you
Yeah,
know,
I tell the young kids today. I always go, that was my tablet. That
yeah,
was my phone.
right, yeah, oh yeah,
I didn't play, right. I didn't have a tablet. That's what I had.
that's right,
And
that's
and
right.
I'm so thankful. Right? Aren't you thankful that your mom had the courage
Oh
to do
man,
that?
100%, 100%. I think about it all the time.
Right. And so you mentioned that she was a composer. Is this where you got your love for composition? Because you have a master's in composition and a PhD in
Yeah,
composition,
my
or is it
doctorate in composition. Yeah,
your
uh,
doctorate's in comp?
yeah, and I mean, my passion for music. My both of my parents are had a big part to do with that, because
Okay.
my pops, he was on the music scene, on the jazz scene. So thanks to him, I got to meet a lot of the cats on the scene. Especially the greats, man, like the greats in the Cincinnati area. I already mentioned a
Right.
couple of them. There's Jim Anderson, a great bassist, Bobby Scott, the great pianist there, like Charlie Wilson.
Mm.
Yeah, I already mentioned Irwin. I mean, there was a guitar player, one of the best cats, Billy McCullum. There's another guitarist, Wilbur Longmire. I mean, I got to meet and ultimately even play with a lot of these guys, because my dad was already on the scene. So I was very blessed that way to be able to grow
Yeah.
up, and even see these cats in my house. And as far as
Right.
writing music, my mom, she had her hand in everything. Like she was one of those who, she was teaching private lessons, she was teaching drama, she would write songs for her classes and things of that nature. So composition as a result, it was just around. Like it wasn't something that she taught me to do, but because it was just a part of my life,
Right. It was
eventually it
right.
just became kind of a natural thing to mess around on the piano and explore.
Wow, that's fantastic. Um, you talked about jazz greats. I also read in your bio that you played with Clark Terry. Yeah, Clark Terry, right?
Yeah, that was an incredible experience
I
because,
mean, oh my gosh.
man, I mean, okay, so this is one of the all-time greats, right? Like, and
Oh, pff,
and
yeah, I don't even know what to say. He's like one. I think he's my all-time favorite trumpet player, man. I mean,
yeah,
that guy's
look, I
amazing.
can't argue with that. I mean, there's many of them for me, but I can't argue with that. I mean, it's you go.
Does anybody play better lines than that guy? I mean,
I
really?
mean, I wouldn't say so. I mean, it might be some that are as good, but
Right.
the better is, that'd be a tough one to justify.
Oh my gosh.
It was
So
great,
what?
man. How he embraced us, because I mean, I'm 20 something. I don't know. I was young, and I mean, I'm still getting to know cats, and they're like, Clark. I'm like, hold on, you mean like Clark Terry, Clark Terry, Clark Terry? Like, really?
You mean the Clark Terry that played with Oscar Peterson?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
exactly.
think.
That's exactly what I was like. So I'm up here thinking about all these Clark Terry and Oscar Peterson records that I've listened to, and I'm like, hold
Uh,
on, man. And
right.
I tell you what I learned from playing with him was that the music always is. Well, let me say this the right way because I don't want to mess this up.
Yeah,
Like
because he's watching. He's watching.
right, I know, right? But the music is always in charge, and
Right.
by that I mean he didn't force anything that night. He didn't
Mm,
try to impress anybody. He
mm,
didn't try to play a bunch of like it was the music. It was all about feel and swinging and melody and just that was the whole night. And interestingly enough, man, it when he took a solo, the things settled down in a way where you could just feel the wisdom and feel the essence of the music. You know what I
mm.
mean? In a way that was just it was
Yeah.
impossible to describe.
Yeah. Well, and that's so very difficult for musicians to get to that point because when you said that it was about the music and he wasn't trying to impress anyone, it's hard for musicians to get there because you get on stage and the next thing you know, you want to try to, play everything you know in one solo and
Yeah.
impress everybody, right? Impress everybody. And, it reminds me of there's a quote by Bill Evans. He, and I think I'm going to get pretty close to this as being accurate. Bill Evans says, I know it may be a peculiarity of mine, especially being a professional performer, but I'd much rather play without an audience.
Hmm.
And when you first hear that, you think, "What the heck? What's that? That doesn't make sense. What's he talking about?" But then, if you stop to think about it, without the audience, he can focus 100% on what? Just the music. He
Hmm.
doesn't have to try to. He's not concerned about, are you liking what I'm playing? Do you like me? Are you
Right.
impressed with my playing? Am I
Right.
doing great? Am I doing great? All that stuff kind of goes away. You know how it is when you sit at home in your living room at night all by yourself. I bet you do some of the best playing you've ever done.
No, it's true. It's true. And this is a great topic. I actually talk about this with, with my students, just how to find the balance between,
Hmm.
you know, being true to the music, being true to yourself, and serving your audience at the same time.
Right.
How do you do
Very
all
difficult.
these things? It is very difficult, but I think, Bob, that having that at the forefront of your mind makes it, a lot more attainable if you are being intentional
Correct. Right.
about
You have
doing all three of
right.
those things.
Yeah, you have to be consciously aware of it.
Right. Right.
Right.
And plan it into to your, to your approach. I mean, one of the things I think that the young players focus so heavily on is like, oh, I got to get better, get better, get better, get better, get better. Of course you
Right.
do. We all do.
Right.
But you
Right.
also have to get better at how you think about actually performing, actually serving your audience, actually executing the music in ways that isn't just about you. Like, so there's this constant kind of teeter tottering that we're trying to to balance things out. But the more intentional you are about it, the more attainable it is.
That is so very true. So very true. So with that being said, you obviously have a passion for the education side too. Obviously, you're serving on faculty at the University of Iowa. So, talk to us about that a little bit. On what drew you to the education side of music, jazz specifically, and how you personally, how that impacts your playing and your performing, how those two go hand in hand for you.
Yeah, well, my passion for teaching, I began to discover it kind of at a young age. I didn't really know that it would be a huge part of what I would ultimately do until a little bit later. I was probably well into my 20s. But once I got into working on my doctorate, I was like, okay, maybe I want to do this. But I had a few stints at teaching various places that kind of it was like I don't know, it was touch and go. But ultimately, coming here, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity, um, because it reignited my passion for teaching, and for teaching jazz specifically, because there there is so much that's amazing about this music. When you
Hmm.
get into the history of the music and you see how it was created, where it
Hmm.
came from,
Right.
when you go all the way back, even to, the music of West Africa and West African
Right.
drumming, and, how it
Right.
comes over here, and all the
Right.
influences from the slaves, and the
Right.
field songs and the work songs and the spiritual.
Right.
And then how the European influence eventually comes in, and you get all of these lush extended tertian
Right.
harmonies, and
Right.
mixed with this African rhythm. That's how Dizzy Gillespie described it. Actually, he was asked what is jazz, and he said, well, it's African rhythm with European harmony. And
Excellent.
you start merging all these things together, and then you also think about the cultural aspects of it. It's like it's the music of the people. It's folk music. It started off in just as being for the people. It wasn't even
Correct.
about performing. It wasn't about being a bad cat. It was about being in the neighborhood. It was about serving each other. It was about singing the blues. It was about getting stuff off your chest. It was about celebrating. It was about crying. You know what I mean? Like as folk music is. And so when you really get into that aspect of it, at least for me, it really changes how I think about my approaches to playing it, and more importantly, how I teach it.
Right.
Because when students and audiences, because it's our job as pedagogues to educate our audience as well,
Right.
when they understand more of the roots and understand the intent behind the music, then they're able to hear it and feel it and digest it in ways that they perhaps may not have been able to previously,
Right.
And
Right. Right.
I put a lot of emphasis on those kinds of things with my students, because that changes how you play.
No doubt.
You know what I mean? It
Right.
when you're
Absolutely.
not just trying to play some scales or some pattern,
Right.
but when you're literally tell
Right.
focusing on telling your story,
Right.
it changes how you play.
Yeah. There's a music education philosopher, sociologist by the name of Christopher Small. And he's no longer with us, but he's got a book out called Musicking, Musickking, Musicking. And
Okay.
his whole thing is we got to stop treating music as a noun and treat it as a verb, which it was intended to be. It's something that we do. It's something that everyone can participate in. Everybody in the neighborhood can participate in it. Everybody can
Yes.
make music, right?
Yes.
So regardless of how good you are or proficient at it you are or how novice you are, you can join in and make music with us. And so it's kind of like he gave an example in his book. You know, some of us are great with words. Others of us are not. Some of us are great writers. Others of us are not. But we never say to somebody, "Don't ever write. Don't,
Right.
don't
Right.
ever talk. You're not good with words, so don't talk."
Yeah, right. You're absolutely right. And in
Right?
fact, it's the joy of, so if we think about professionals, versus amateurs, if you will,
Right.
the what allows amateurs or audience members to appreciate what the professionals do even more is their access to it, their ability to
Right.
go and do it themselves, and
Right.
whether it's their hobby or the way they release, whatever it is. I mean, I know for me, like, I enjoy playing basketball, for example. I'm not in the NBA, but one of the things that
Right.
makes me appreciate the NBA even more is me going out and playing. I'm like, yeah, I know how hard that is to do. I know how amazing this is.
Well, that's exactly right. Look at how many sucky golfers there are, right?
Yeah.
Right? But the
Right,
PG
right.
but the PGA wants everybody playing golf.
That's right. That's right.
Everyone. It doesn't matter that you stink at it. Go play golf.
And
And we
golf is hard, by the way. I try.
but we have to have that kind of mentality in music. We got to
I
encourage
agree.
everyone get involved and play, regardless of how proficient you are. You can make music,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah. And I mean, when you think about the K through 12 schools, what they once were as far as music programs, and unfortunately, a lot of these things, being cut, for various
Right.
reasons, it has a lot to do with why it's more challenging for some of the younger
Right.
generations to appreciate more instruments and things because they're just not doing it themselves. It's not because something
Right.
they got skipped over, somehow in a generation. They just
Right.
the access has kind of changed. So that part is important to me too. Getting music back, into the high schools and elementary schools as well.
Yeah. Right. So okay. So are you just starting at the University of Iowa? Have you been there for a while?
This is my first year. I'm
Wow.
literally in the middle of my first year. I just moved to Iowa City in August, and a few weeks later, I'm right there. I'm teaching. So
Oh, that's awesome. Were you
yeah.
in Austin until then, or were you back in Cincinnati till you went?
No, I actually lived in Atlanta for 4 years. I had some
Okay.
really great experiences there, playing, producing, composing.
Right.
And that's when Dr. Phillips gave me a call and said, "Hey, I got this opening. What do you
Wow.
think?" So,
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, University of Iowa. I mean, I remember. Is it called the Johnson County Landmark Jazz Band? Is that what it is?
yeah, yeah,
Right.
that's
So
right.
it's got a pretty good jazz program, does it not?
Oh, absolutely, and it's getting better all the time. Dr. Damani Phillips, he's the head of our jazz department, and he's doing an amazing job. Him along with our director of the School of Music, excuse me, Dr. Tammy Walker. They are just doing a great job of really being very intentional about how to build up the jazz program. And, one of the things that we're really focusing on is building relationships, not only between the students, but, faculty and the students and between
Right.
faculty. Because talking about jazz or just music in general, but jazz in particular, the way that you relate to each other has so much to do with how you play. And that's just an important part of the cultural aspect of the music. It being about relationships, it being about the people. So a lot of
Right.
the emphasis that we as a department, that we put on the program, or the emphasis we put on principles rather, one of those main principles is the relationship. So we try to keep the program at a certain size,
Right.
not too small, not too big, so that
Right.
we can have that intimacy, with our students, so they can get a lot more care and instruction, and really kind of dig and get to know them a bit.
Right.
So we're not just like, take this class, get a grade, and move on. But we really have time to dig in and get to know them, and get inside of their minds a little bit,
I,
and they can get inside of ours, because it's
right.
important for them to get to know us as well. So yeah,
Right.
it's really awesome.
Well, I think that's fantastic because you're right. When you get to the bigger programs, I did my master's and doctorate at North Texas,
Hmm.
and oh my gosh, right? It's a big program. There's all kinds of jazz cats walking around, and it's hard for faculty to get to know everybody on an intimate level. I think it's important to have these settings where jazz is being taught in intimate settings where faculty like yourself can get involved with the students and help them uh, not personally and musically, which is
Yeah,
going to have an impact on their music. So it's great. So talking about the student, let's turn our attention to the student for a second.
sure.
If you had to, off the top of your head, if I said to you, give a list, it could be two, three, four, 5 points, whatever, of do's and don'ts that you would encourage somebody that wants to get in and start playing jazz. A lot of the jazz piano skills listeners are actually, a lot of them are accomplished musicians in other genres like classical music, and are wanting to get into studying jazz.
Right.
So whether they're new to music or they're already a professional musician starting to study jazz, what are some do's and don'ts that you would offer up to anyone starting to embark on studying this art form?
Well, that's a loaded question, but I love it though. I love it. So no,
Uh,
number one, on the list, and we've already talked about this, is your ear training, listening,
right,
and listening, in multiple ways. Number one is listening for enjoyment. You
right,
need to enjoy it. You need
right,
to love it. You need to feel it. Don't just learn jazz because you think it's cool. You
right,
learn it because you love it. You know,
right,
and those are very different, because you can have a moment in the audience where you see, really amazing band and everybody's cheering, and you like, ooh, I want to do that. That's cool. No, that's not good enough. That's not good enough, because
right,
when you go get in the shed,
right.
you're not gonna have the right amount of passion or motivation.
Yeah, the audience ain't there, are they?
No, man. And then on
Yeah.
top of that, you'll be taking the shortcut version,
Right,
to do it, because there's all these different ways now, right? There's all these
right.
YouTube
Oh,
videos, and
oh my gosh. Yes.
cats teaching cats patterns, and stuff like that. And
Right,
I'm like, look, man, there you can find value in various things. I'm not saying that every single pattern or every single YouTube, like, you
right.
can find value in those things.
Correct.
If they're
Right.
not rooted in the right things, if it's not based in the appropriate principles, which for me is starting with loving the music, then they're not gonna serve the right purpose, and you're not
Correct.
gonna know how to use them. So that's number
Correct.
one: is listen for enjoyment. Then listen to absorb. What do you need to get out of it? Well, rhythm, music, or excuse me, listening, most important musical skill. Rhythm, most important musical element. Rhythm defines everything. It defines style. It defines genre. It defines
Correct.
melody.
Correct.
Everything.
Correct.
It's
Yeah, because we're all
infinitely variable, right?
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because we're all using the same notes. We're all using the same 12 notes. We're all
That's right.
using the same harmonic structures. That doesn't change. There's not a set of chords for jazz and a set of chords for classical music,
And there's a
right?
finite combination of notes that you can have,
I'm glad to hear you say that. That's exactly right. Finite.
you know,
That's
but
right.
rhythm
That's
is
right.
infinite. And rhythm define literally, I mean, if you think about classical music, it's like, okay, you know, we typically will like default to like, you know, Mozart or Beethoven or something like that. It's like, okay, we'll pick one of those guys, you know.
Right.
It's like, well, Mozart, a lot of, if you just look at the pitch set for a lot of his, you know, most famous compositions, a lot of it is scales and, you know, like repeated notes. Well, what defines that? Well, it's the rhythm, you know, like literally Eine kleine Nacht music is like an arpeggio, you know, boom,
Right.
boom, 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 boom. But it's the rhythm that gives the definition to it. So, you know,
Right.
you apply that to jazz, it's like, well, I don't understand why my stuff doesn't sound good. Why am I not getting there? Well, you've got to get inside of the rhythm. You've got to get inside of the feel. And by you getting inside of it, it will get inside of you.
You know what? You know what I use as an example for this with students all the time? I always play C jam blues, and I always go, look, Duke Ellington takes two notes. No one ever plays the note G and says, "Man, I love that note G." And I really, William, I really love the note G when it's followed by the note C. Something about that combination just
Oh,
man.
man.
But you know the note B
I
doesn't
love
do
it.
anything for me. The note
Right,
B
right,
doesn't do
right. Oh, I love it, Bob. I love it.
right,
I use that example as well. I use the CJ. I
right.
speak
Because
for
look what
kindred
look
spirits, man.
right. Because look what Duke Ellington does with what he does with two notes. What is it? It's the rhythm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that, you know, so when it comes to learning how to improvise, if you think more rhythmically, if you lead with your rhythm, because and this is, you know, so this is, I'll add this to my list, which is, you know, kind of going in no particular order outside of the listening part. um but you know, improvisation is a compositional skill.
Correct.
So you're composing on the spot. So you have to develop some type of approach that is going to allow you to think about melody properly. And that's why it's so important to think about it from a rhythmic perspective, because that's how ultimately all great composers write their great compositions, is through developing various melodic and motives and you know,
Yes.
rhythmic ideas, you know, things of that nature. That is more of that than it is about mastering the harmony.
Correct. You know, you touch on so many good things here. You know, I instruct students all the time. I tell them that your conceptual understanding of music will ultimately determines your physical success. So,
Mm,
if you are not thinking about jazz correctly, if you're not thinking about music correctly, or if it's skewed in any way, shape, or form, then your physical success will be limited. And what I'm getting at with these students is something like this. I always say to my students, I'll say to somebody, how many notes do we have in music? Okay. Well, if they can't tell me how many notes there are in music, their conceptual understanding is already skewed. You see what I'm saying? They,
absolutely.
they're, I go, how many primary sounds do we have? I said, you know some of them. You've heard people talk about major and minor. So what are some other sounds, right?
Mhm.
Well, they don't know all the other sounds. Well, okay. Well, see, so it begins with a conceptual understanding, you know, which is going to drive your physical development. And then what you touched upon also, I think, is really important. You have to have, when you're talking about composition, right? You have to have some kind of formulaic way in which you approach the development of ideas, whether you're writing them down or you're improvising. And if you don't have some kind of formulaic way, the Hollywood notion is that the piano player sitting there with the pencil in his mouth and just
Right, right, right.
and just grabbing notes and
Just
then
comes out of
and,
nowhere, man.
yeah, just right. And I think if people approach it that way, if you sit down and practice that way, where you just kind of think you're randomly grabbing stuff, you're not going to have the success that you're looking for.
Not at all, not at all. And the development of materials and preparation, like that's the thing. There's this myth out there. You said do's and don'ts. Here's a don't. Don't assume that improvisation is just getting up there and just making some stuff up. Like that's not what good improv is. I use this example all the time, Bob. You and I both speak the English language. We speak it,
Correct.
pretty well. We're having an improvised conversation right now,
Correct.
but it
Right
is
now.
our mastery of the language through preparation, understanding, looking up stuff in the dictionary, understanding
Correct.
grammar and syntax and subject
Right.
and verb agreement, all these different things that we've studied that allows us to have a conversation that is improvised but that is still coherent, where we're sticking to a subject. There are parameters, there's boundaries, there are things, and we're able to stick within those because of how much we've prepared over the
Correct.
years. And
Correct.
that's
Right.
what improvisation in jazz is as well.
That's exactly right. Man, if I could reach through this screen right now and hug you, I would. Right?
Oh
Because
man.
you're absolutely spot on. And uh, you know this 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 intellectual understanding, like you said, that sometimes people, if your idea that jazz, like improvisation and jazz, is just being pulled out of thin blue air, then you're already behind the eight ball. and
Right.
and that's our job as teachers, to help kind of de- de- debunk these myths that exist out there when people
Right.
want to study this art form, right? And and,
Absolutely.
and I and and if it wasn't teachable, and it wasn't learnable, then you wouldn't be at the University of Iowa right now. You
Right.
wouldn't have a gig. You wouldn't have a gig, man.
I will never get. No, you're right. I mean, it's very, very teachable and very learnable. I think that, you know, there's this desire, and I don't even blame students for this. Especially students of this generation. They're the students that have grown up with a bunch of tech and with stuff that's just at your fingertips. So
Right.
a lot of times they're just this thought that you can kind of fast track you can Google your way into a solo or something like that. You know what I mean? So I don't blame them for that. It's just like, okay, if you want to get this, there's still some what you all might consider to be old school approaches that you're gonna have to take. You're gonna have to listen. You're just gonna have to sit down and listen and absorb sometime.
You know, right.
Stuff like that. You know what I mean?
That's exactly right. And you don't even have to imitate. You listen so that you can imitate, right? That's why we listen, so we can imitate. It'd be like, I tell students all the time, I go, what would you think of a kid who wants to play basketball, and he wants to play basketball at the highest level possible, but he's never watched like Michael Jordan play,
Right.
or he's never watched LeBron James play, or
Right.
he's never watched. Hey, you know what? Forget that. He's never watched an NBA basketball game, but he wants to
Right.
play basketball at a high level.
Right.
That makes no sense, right?
Right.
So uh, y- that kid would be watching basketball because who does he want to imitate? I'm going to imitate Michael Jordan. I'm going
Right.
to imitate the people that aspire me to be
Absolutely.
a great basketball. Well, we do the same thing in music, right? So
100%.
when you ask a student who they're listening to and they can't answer you, that's a problem.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that one of the things that I run into also, which is very much connected to this, is the discipline of listening as well. It's like making that a daily part of what you do, particularly in your early stages of mastering this music. Because I've had various young pianists come to me and say, "Oh yeah, how do I get better? What should I do? So on and so forth." And I'm like, "Well, how much you listening? Make sure you're doing plenty of listen, this, and this, and this." And they'll just kind of look at me like, because they want me to tell them, some voicing or some pattern or something. And I'm like, well, listen, guys, like the reason why I'm telling you this is because if you want to know how me or anybody that you think can really play. How did we get there? Well, it was through this, because you're absorbing more than even just those particular little nuggets that you want to learn how to play, those little licks and stuff like that, if you allow yourself to. So, it's such an important part of it. I can't put enough emphasis on it, because you can learn
Right.
more from that than you can from taking lessons.
Right. Even passive listening, right? You can be cooking in the kitchen and having jazz playing on the back. Even passive listening. You don't have to always be active listening.
Right.
Just have it playing. Have it
Agreed.
playing. I've used this as an example too. I tell students that if I wanted to learn, let's say I wanted to learn a foreign language, I wanted to learn how to speak French. The very first thing that I would do is I would go out and I would buy a whole bunch of French CDs or French tapes of people speaking French. And I
Mm-hmm.
would listen to them in my car. I would listen to them when I'm cooking. I would listen to them all the time. I would have no idea what they're saying. I don't care what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be listening to them because I want to understand the articulation, the dialect, how they're expressing themselves, how they're saying stuff. I would just be listening. I don't even care what words they're saying because I don't know yet, right? But I'll eventually know what words they're saying. But for now, I just want to kind of absorb the language and kind of get into French. Would you agree with that?
I love it, and let me just go ahead and piggyback off of that real quick, because once you do open up a French to English dictionary and you see what those words mean, you have an oral connection to it that will give so much more weight to reading the definition of that word, and that you cannot get just from reading it if you hadn't done all the listening before. I will give you a perfect
Correct.
example of this. I listened to a bunch of music before I actually started studying jazz piano when I was 15. And I'll never forget this. My teacher showed me the blues scale. Now, I had heard it countless numbers of times before this.
Right,
And
right.
I had even played it. I didn't know what I was playing. I was
I did
playing.
the I did
You
the
know what
same
I mean?
thing. Right, I
And
was playing it. I didn't even know what it was.
oh man! And when he showed me this, man, I want to tell, like, it was the most eye-opening light bulb epiphany moment that anybody.
Oh
I
my
mean, I
goodness.
swear, man, it was like the
Uh,
clouds parted and the angels
right.
came down, and the sunshine was on my forehead, and rainbow, double rainbow. I mean, it was like, oh my goodness, that's what
Oh,
that is. But it was
oh.
because I had heard it so many times,
That is
and because
correct.
it was in my ears.
That is
When he
so
showed
correct.
it to me, I had this epiphany moment, but I didn't realize, and I figured this out pretty quickly after, that I had so much more control over it, because
Correct.
first I absorbed it so much as a listener that when I
Right.
understood what it was and how it functioned, I had the listening
Right.
to attach all of the definition to.
Right.
So it made learning what it was and how it functioned exponentially more valuable
Right.
because of all of the listening that I had done.
Yeah, that's fantastic. A funny story. When I was in college, I had a roommate that was from Iraq. He was from Iraq, and we would watch like the old Saturday Night Live shows, right? And they would always have these skits on where there'd be like inside the skit there'd be some Middle Eastern person, and so he's speaking Aramaic or whatever. And I would turn to my buddy Tarek and I would say, "Whoa, what are they saying? What are they saying?" And he's cracking up laughing. He goes, "They're not saying anything." I said, "They're not saying anything." He goes, "Nothing." But he goes, "But what they're saying has the same dialect and accent, so it sounds like they actually sound like they're speaking the language, but they're saying nothing." Isn't
Wow.
that isn't that fascinating? So
That
just
is,
through imitation, they were coming that close. They were convincing to you and me that it sounded like they were actually speaking like Aramaic or something, right? And
wow.
and they were not at all, but they had done listening to that dialect, listened as
Yeah,
comedians, they listen to that accent and that dialect so much that they could improvise words and make it sound
absolutely.
like they were speaking the language.
That's
That's how,
incredible.
in other words, that's how powerful listening is.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's incredible. That is
Yeah.
incredible. Wow.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
okay, okay. So a couple other things here, real quick, man, because
Sure.
I got to tell you, man, I could sit here probably for like the next 4 hours and talk to you. So,
I was just
uh,
thinking the same thing, Bob. I said, so Bob and I, we're gonna have to do this again, man. So
we
we
are going to, we're going to do a part two and maybe even
yeah,
a part
yeah,
three,
let's
right?
do it. Let's make it happen.
Absolutely. So, okay, a couple things. This is going to be kind of like a random, what do they call it? Rapid fire. This is going to be a rapid fire segment.
Let's
Okay,
do
so
it.
I'm gonna ask you some jazz rapid fire advice on different jazz piano skills,
Okay.
and you quickly off the top of your head just tell the listeners what you would recommend with regards to practicing and how. Okay, so here we go. Scales, arpeggios.
Scales and arpeggios, got to do them. Is focus on your technique because a lot of times cats want to play stuff, and the reason why they can't do it is because they can't do it physically. And then as far as using that to solidify, your harmony, using it for harmony. The quicker you can identify scales and the quicker you can identify the notes and the chords, the much faster you'll be able to learn tunes, improvise over tunes, and build upon whatever other concepts that you want to know.
Yeah. And I think you would probably add to that. I tell students all the time practice scales and arpeggios through the entire sound, from the root to the 13th. Don't stop it. And I always tell students that I always have students practice scales, various entry and exit points. I never have them
Mhm.
play from root to root, root to root,
Mhm.
because I want the ears to be actively engaged, listening for something specific. Root to the 7th, root to the 9th, root to the 11th, root to the 13th. So now my ear is engaged and listening for that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Yeah.
love.
Yeah. So, okay. So, scale. Okay. Next, um, harmonic development, voicings. What would you tell jazz piano skills listeners about practicing voicings? How would you
Right.
go about doing it?
Make sure that you're practicing your voicings in all 12 keys,
Mm,
and practice them in different sequences. Don't just practice them chromatically, because we play a visual instrument as pianists, and it's real easy to get used to just seeing things in a chromatic, be it ascending or descending nature. Practice them in whole steps. Practice them in the circle of fifths. Come
right.
up with your own sequences. Get a friend and have them call out keys and ask you to play whatever voicing that is. Learn a lot of different voicings. Learn different inversions, and also explore voicings for yourself.
All right.
Definitely get inside of them. It's because you sometimes you're going to come up with something that you didn't necessarily hear somebody else do, and you need to get to the point where you have enough understanding of harmony to be able to feel comfortable with exploring those kinds of things.
And you you have to have enough understanding with what you're saying there. You have to have enough understanding that if you come up with some kind of voicing structure, you have to have enough understanding to decipher what it is, so that you can now replicate it in the other keys that you just
Absolutely.
you got to
Absolutely.
be able to you got to transplant that.
Absolutely. And the other thing I would say is voicings are not interchangeable from one style to the next. You need to understand what style you're playing in that moment. So that if you're playing Georgia on My Mind and it's calling for more triads and kind of root position like seventh chords, and we playing a bunch of extensions with sharp 11s and 13s in places where they don't go. Just because you're playing jazz doesn't mean you're supposed to be playing extensions all the time.
Hey, I know you spent time in Texas, so I'm going to tell you a real quick story, my friend. when, when I got down here, I got down here for graduate school, and so I'm in the jazz program there, and I'm I'm doing all my Herbie voicings and my Chick voicings,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
right, somebody recommends me to play this gig, and it's a country western gig with a country like a country band here in town in Dallas, right? So I go out, I take the gig, I go, how hard can this be, right? I'm going like, it's country music, man. How hard can this be, right? So I go out with this band, and I knew I was in trouble, man, when the steel guitar player sitting up next to me. I'm going like, wait, whoa, what the heck is that? And so the band starts, and I'm playing the voicings that I play, man. And this guy on the steel guitar, he's staring at me. The leader of the band's looking at me like, what the heck are you? So man, I tell everybody all the time that was the toughest gig I ever played because I couldn't just rely on muscle memory. I just couldn't do muscle memory anymore. I had to actually think about I got to play the shapes and sounds that fit to the genre, to the style of music that I'm
Right.
playing. I mean,
That's right.
I had sweat coming off my forehead and that was that was a tough gig, man. So
Oh
you're
yeah.
right.
Oh yeah.
You're,
I love it, man.
okay, here's one right up your alley, man. We're going to talk about rapid fire melodic development. What compositional approaches do you utilize in developing improvisation?
So, in developing improvisation, if I'm starting right from the beginning, we're going straight to the blues scale. We're going
Okay.
to use that as our pitch set, and we're going to focus on rhythm. We're going to focus on picking. What I'll have students do, for example, is let's pick one rhythm, and you're going to use only the notes in the blues scale, and you are going to rely on training your ear essentially to be able to be as versatile as you possibly can with these limited resources. We
Yeah.
don't want you feeling like you gotta just use all 12 pitches, all rhythms, all this different stuff. The blues scale, with the blues being, central to the music, being a foundational element of the music, this gets students hearing something that sounds like jazz immediately because it is, and it gets them focusing on rhythm without
Correct.
having all of these different things to take into account right away. We don't even focus on chord changes yet. We're not even focusing on a bunch of scales and all these other things because we want to get you as streamlined as possible to the point where you're thinking about how to create melodies using melodic motives. And then we
Yeah,
just
that's
build
really good.
things out from there. You take now do two rhythms, alternate them, put them in different spots, learn how to use some space. You can take this exercise far even with just using the notes in the blues scale. Then we get into using more pitches inside of the chords. We start talking about chord changes and things of that nature and building everything out from there. So thinking
That's
more compositionally versus thinking harmonically.
yeah.
I know a lot of times jazz we just focus so much in on the harmony, but I want you to think more compositionally because this is a compositional skill that you're developing.
That's correct. I used to have a teacher that used to give me two notes, and I'd have to improvise on those two notes on a single chord, right? Two notes,
I did
and he
that
used
too.
to, right, right,
Yeah,
right,
that's
right,
it's
because
one of the best exercises though, man. You get to think it's so like you have to be musical. You don't have a choice. You
you
know,
don't have a choice. And he used to say, "Hey, man, if you can't improvise with two notes, you're not going to be able to improvise with three.
that's right.
You can't improvise with four. It doesn't get easier when you start adding more
Right,
notes.
right,
If
right,
you can't do two, right? And you touched upon something else that's very you used the phrase just a moment ago, developing with limited resources. That is so profound because I tell students all the time that creativity is spawned from limitation. It doesn't Creativity doesn't come from abundance.
right.
Creativity comes from limitation.
I like
So
that.
we right? So there was an old TV show a long time ago. You're probably too young to remember it, but it was called MacGyver. And MacGyver was
Oh, I
always
remember
you
MacGyver.
remember that?
Absolutely.
He's like in a jail cell and all he's got is like a pencil and a needle and he's got to break out, right? Right? And so the
Man,
point what I loved about MacGyver is he had to be creative with limited resources. In music, that's if you want to really become a great improviser, limit your resources, limit your options, and then create with
absolutely.
right.
Man, you speaking my language, Bob. I tell my students all the time. I'm like, the beauty is in the boundaries. That's where the
It's in the
beauty.
right. And you know what? There's an old expression. What do you call a river without banks? a swamp,
Oh, I never heard that one. I like that. I like
right?
that. I'm gonna steal that one. I'm gonna use that
And,
one.
and, and so if you're trying to improvise without the banks, without the boundaries,
Right.
you got a swamp. You're gonna have a
Yeah.
swamp
That's
on your
good
hands.
stuff. I like that. I like that.
Okay. You spoke a lot about rhythmic skills, rhythm. So rhythmic skills. How do you instruct? What tips can you give jazz piano skills listeners about practicing rhythm?
Practicing rhythm for me, a lot of it, one of the main things that I recommend is listening and moving your body, getting it inside of you. You know, this was a lot, such a large component of early jazz was dancing, dance music.
Right.
And you know, to really get the swing rhythm, or you know, even if you're delving into other you know, subgenres, Afro-Cuban things of that nature, dancing is an underrated part of
Mm,
music education. You don't have, because a lot of it's so awkward for people to think about themselves
right.
as dancers a lot of the time. But I'm like,
Correct.
this is not about you, you know, joining Alvin Ailey's dance troupe. That's not what we're talking about. Like, we're talking about you getting this inside of your body. And I think that when we think so much about rhythm and the approach to rhythm, we focus too much on playing and not absorbing. Now, that doesn't mean don't play. I mean, obviously,
Right.
playing is important, but you
Right.
know, when we're talking about style, well, it's the rhythm that defines the style. So you have to make it bigger than just your role. That's another aspect of it, is understand the roles of all of the instruments, because it's not just your rhythmic concept that contributes to the overall rhythmic concept. That's a part of it, but you're not doing that by yourself. You need to
Correct.
understand what the role of the drums are, with the bass, and you know, all of the different instruments and how all of those fit in. That
Right.
those two things alone will take someone's rhythmic playing to another level. Another big part of rhythm is your dynamics. If you're banging away, then it's going to affect how it feels rhythmically. A lot of cats struggle with rhythm because they're trying to play too loud, for
Right.
example, or they're not playing,
Right.
or they're playing too soft, or there's not enough variance in the dynamics and touch and feel and accents and things of that nature. So rhythm
Right.
encompasses all of these different things, and that's how you can ultimately, you know. And then outside of that, you know, just, you know, you got to shed. I mean, of course, you got to shed,
Right. Right.
but pay attention to how, when you're listening to solos, pay attention to the rhythmic development as well.
Right.
Don't just
You
listen
know,
to the scales and stuff like that. Pay attention to
that's
the rhythmic development.
that's exactly right. I have found that students struggle, believe it or not, and I think you might be able to attest to this. I think students struggle with the quarter note eighth note relationship.
Hmm.
So one of the things that I do is I'll place a pair of eighth notes on count four. I'll put three quarter note on count one, two, and three, and say, now play that rhythm, make it sound like jazz.
Hmm.
Now let's move those eighth notes to count three. Now let's move those eighth notes to count two.
Hmm.
Let's move those eighth notes to count one. Right. Let's put a pair of eighth notes on counts one and three, right, with quarter notes on two and four. Now play that, take any note and play that rhythm and make it sound like jazz, or apply that rhythm to an arpeggio and make it sound like jazz. So I've
Absolutely.
always found that, right? I've always found that just, you know, right? Can you swing a quarter note? Right? We're always talking about swinging eighth notes, but what about, can you swing that quarter note, man?
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Because that's what the bass player is mostly playing. If you're playing a swing tune, that
Right. That's right.
that's good 90% of what they're doing, you know, throughout a swing tune. So
That's correct. So, you know, this is an interesting topic. So when you come back on, we're going to explore that one in a lot more depth.
I
Now,
love it.
the last rapid fire, oral skills. You've talked a lot about listening and training the ear. What specific exercises would you recommend that jazz piano skills listeners do for ear training?
Whoa, wow, and we're gonna have to have one on this too, Bob, because this is loaded.
Okay,
But, but I'll say
we'll have to
this.
break all these down, right?
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick. But I'll say this: as far as listening, you know, if let's say there's one particular tune that, you know, you're like, I can get a lot out of this tune, whatever tune this is, whatever recording that it is. Listen to it again first for enjoyment. Then listen to it and
Right.
listen to your instrument. Then listen to the relationship between your instrument and the other instruments. Isolate one of the other instruments. Listen to just the drums. Listen to just the bass. Then pay attention to their relationships. You can listen to the same recording 20, 30, 40 times and have a different way of listening to it each time. And then as far as oral skills of other nature, what does the major seventh sound like? What does a ninth sound like? What is this? What does the sharp turn third? Sharp 11 sound like? What does a flat 13
Right.
sound like?
Right.
Because if you need to know how they sound to know how you want to use them. So you don't
Right.
want to just be playing them because they work over the chord. You want
Right.
to be able to play them because that's what you're hearing. And in
Yeah.
order to hear it, because we don't want you to play my solo or Bird
Right.
solo
Right.
or Bud
Right.
Powell solo or McCoy
Right.
solo. Learn from
Right.
them. But if
Right.
you know how they sound for yourself, then you
Right.
will have your own voice because you're in control because of how you trained your ears to hear the different elements of music. So don't just learn that they apply to the chord. Know
Correct.
how they sound. And
That is
that
so
that's the quickest answer that I can give you,
Yeah.
Bob.
Hey, William, you're right on. Along those lines, I tell students all the time, I go like, I say to them, dominant sharp 11. And they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them, and they're looking at me, and I go, dominant sharp 11. And I go, what do you hear?
Mm-hmm.
And they're staring at me. And then I go like this, helicopter, what do you hear? Police car siren, what do you hear?
Hmm.
Dog barking, what do you hear? I said, you heard all those, but I said sharp 11 and you didn't hear that? But you
Wow.
but you heard helicopter? You heard dog barking?
I love that, Bob. I'm still in that one too. I love that, man. I love that.
Right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
I'll go,
I'm gonna be
"Hey,
quoting you, Doctor Lawrence. I'm gonna be quoting you, man. I'll be like, yeah, the great Doctor Lawrence says it like
don't
this.
stop. No, don't stop." But it may that's what you're getting at. That's the point you're getting at. You have to hear
100%.
you have to hear those, right? And if
Absolutely.
we can train our ears to hear a dog barking when a dog's not barking, and if we can train our ears to hear a helicopter when there's no helicopter going overhead, then we can train our ears to hear a sharp 11 for heaven's sakes,
100%. 100.
right?
And you're playing skyrockets once you can hear all these things because now you're in control in a way where you're not letting the chord changes run you. You run them. You're in charge
That's
at that
that's
point.
that's right. The tail's not wagging the dog, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
another thing, just real quick, I like to have students do is play the changes and recite the harmonic function out loud when they're playing it, right? So they're going 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, 3, flat 3, 2, 5. So they're hearing this relationship, this harmonic motion relationship, right?
100.
Because if you go C major, A minor, D minor, G7, well, what's the relationship? The ears are going like, okay, so what?
Right. Right.
But 16251, I tell students all the time, if I say 16251 to any accomplished jazz musician, they're hearing it already as I say it,
100%. You're absolutely right.
right?
I love it.
And we want our students, do we not? We want our students to hear what's not there. Like I always give the example of the chef who sticks his finger into the pot, right? And he actually can tell you what's missing. Right? He tells you what's missing. He
Yeah.
licks his finger and goes, "It needs garlic.
Yeah.
Put garlic," right? We should be able to hear music and say, "It needs a sharp 11. We need a
Yeah.
sharp 11 here.
Right. Right.
We need a
Absolutely, man.
we need a flat 9 here.
I'm
Put
still
that
in that
beautiful."
with you.
Okay. William, man, this has been like on a scale of 1 to 10, this has been like 150, man. I mean, it's been such a joy to meet you, officially meet you. I felt like I already knew you. I read your bio and information, and I also feel like I know your mom, man. Even though I haven't met your mom, I got
Yeah.
what a great woman.
I
So
appreciate that. I appreciate that. This has been amazing. This has been
uh,
amazing. Bobs. Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to do it again, man. Let's make it happen. Let's do it. This is
We
awesome.
will we will do it again. And for all the Jazz Piano Skills listeners out there, do a Google search for William Menefield. And there's some playing out there. Check him out at University of Iowa, doing great things there. The students are very fortunate, very blessed to have you on faculty there and guiding them and teaching them and helping train the next generation of jazz lions that are going to come up
Yeah,
and keep
man.
this wonderful art form alive. So thank you for all that you do there at the university as well.
Oh, thank you, Bob. I really appreciate you. Thank you for having me. And man, this is amazing. Can't wait to do it again, man. This is
We will
awesome.
definitely
This
we'll
is
do it
awesome
again.
what you're doing. Like this is awesome. Let me
Oh,
say this.
thank you.
I am so excited about this podcast to know that there's all these listeners out there, people, pianists excited to learn jazz. My goodness gracious. I wish you all the best.
Oh,
Please,
thank
please
you.
share it hard, listen a lot, absorb, have fun. Man, this is awesome.
All right, William. God bless you, man. Thanks so much. I'll be back in touch with you soon through email and phone, and we'll get you back on the show here quickly. But I'll let you know when this podcast is up and going so you can share it with friends and students there at the university as well.
Wonderful. Love it. Thanks a lot, Bob.
All right. Thank you, William.